There was one benefit to having everyone in the hostel trying to avoid me. It was easy to get space to myself in the living room. Hey. Alright, not quite everyone. Hey. How are you holding up? I explained the steps I'd taken with my parents, and how I suspected that Brendan was behind the whole thing but couldn't prove it. Danny frowned. Do you want me to lean on him?
Please.
What? If he's guilty, I can make him confess. You mean you'd threaten him?
No. Not quite.
He just looked at me. Clearly, he was willing to take this further than threats. No, don't. I didn't like Brendan. I might even hate him. But I didn't want him physically hurt. And I didn't want to be responsible for making Danny do something like that. I've already lost my job anyway. It's too late to go back to the way things were. Sometimes there's no way to fix everything, right? We just have to deal with what we have. Danny nodded slowly. If that's the way you want to play it. But if he gives you any trouble, if he asks you to do anything, if he bothers you, if he tries to get you alone, you come get me. Understand? Don't let him near you. I smiled. It's good to know I have you to protect me. Always.
Aw. Thanks, Danny. Your best scary boyfriend.
I tracked down James in the hostel lobby. What? Here. This is the money I owe you for this week's rent. And this is the money you're supposedly missing from the till. Which I did not steal. Sure you didn't. No, you listen to me. I'm a paying customer now. You can't push me around. I may have spent most of my life too quiet to stand up for myself, but this time I had had enough. I never stole from you. I never would steal from you or anyone else. I've already given you the money you wanted, so I've got no reason to pretend that I'm innocent. I am innocent. I was fixing the register drawer because Brendan told me you said it was broken and I had to fix it. And if you didn't know the drawer was broken, how come Brendan did? If you've got that CCTV footage, look further back. Look what happened before I fixed the register. I don't take orders from you. Do you want the real thief to be under your roof and get away with it? I don't know what actually happened. I have no way to find out. But maybe you do. That's all I could do. I didn't know if it would do any good, but I had to try.
Ball's in your court, James.
Saturday was the last day of formal university classes for the spring semester. Today, the reading period began and the library filled with students revising for their exams. I had a little bit of catching up still to do. Our beach trip meant I had missed a class, and then the fallout from the theft had been a huge distraction. Still, I wasn't going to let a little thing like that stop me. Maybe these courses weren't very serious or important for my degree back home, but there was no way I was going to fail. Many of the other hostel residents were now obsessed with the need to study. Danny and Peggy in particular. Mark spent a lot of time in the library anyway, so there wasn't much difference to be seen. Only Jihyo seemed completely unbothered by the impending examinations. I suppose that being an artist made her too mellow to show stress. Or else there really wasn't a way to cram for an art exam. The exam period would begin next Monday and last for a little over 2 weeks. The tests had to be spread out to be sure that no student, whatever their schedule, would have 2 exams on the same day. I only had 2 classes, so I would be done with everything by the beginning of June. Then I'd have the rest of the month to hang out and finish exploring England, and then it would all be over.
Now we wait to see if Danny asks us an important question in a little bit.
3, 2, 1, go! The flag was waved. Danny and I revved our engines and shot off down the track. In no time, we left the other competitors behind and were neck and neck with each other. You really think you can beat me, Flynn? Danny's voice floated towards me over the roaring wind. I grinned. I know I can beat you! The cart track wove around a hill and through a group of trees, lapping 3 times like a video game. Danny swerved in front of me, shifting left and right to prevent me from getting a go around him. We rounded a turn, and Danny's high speed caused him to ram into the tires on the opposite end. I and several other people passed him, whooping with joy. I looked back and saw him gritting his teeth, that familiar fire in his eyes. Oh boy. It took about a minute for him to weave back around the other racers and come neck and neck with me. Don't think you can get around me. Danny said nothing, just revved his engines further. We were rounding a turn, so I slowed down to make it. Danny instead sped up, then slammed his brakes and swerved. He drifted through the turn, losing half as much speed as I did, and pulled ahead of me. What? No fair! I tried to catch up to him in the last lap, but it was hopeless. I was as far behind him as the other racers were behind me. By the time he won, he had nearly lapped them. As we crept out of the carts, I pouted. Danny approached me with an easygoing smile. Would you look at that? No fair! I thought you said you wouldn't go all dark-eyed on me. Yeah, well, I couldn't help it. I wasn't about to lose our bet. Aw, I really wanted to try that new sushi place. We're still going there. Really? Of course. Whatever makes you happy. But you can bet I'll collect later on tonight. He smiled at me and I flushed. Danny followed me into my room and firmly closed the door behind him, loosening the collar of his shirt. Slightly flustered. Now, look here. I held up my hands, creeping back towards the bed. Oh, I'm looking.
I love that Danny always has a towel. I don't know why, that's so funny to me.
He was already undressing and slowly coming towards me. I grinned, but tried not to show it too much. I love these little cat and mouse games. I said tonight we were going to play a board game. And I won the bet, so we get to play the game I pick, right? Well, yes. And this is the game I pick. He lifted me in his arms and gently tossed me into the bed. I squeaked as I fell.
Oh, Flynn.
Not fair. Definitely fair. You agreed, after all. He began removing my clothes and kissing my neck. Well, yes, but... My mind started to fog and Danny smiled at me. You can't hide what you really want. Not from me.
I wonder what was different about that one. That one was like a new line. I can't remember what he said to us when we were Malia.
I flushed and helped him get the rest of my clothes off. That night was definitely a fun way to relax before final exams.
Mm-hmm. Do you think that's a pear on the back of the laptop? I don't know.
Late that night, Danny came into my room. How did your test go? He smiled like a shark. I knew you'd do great. You always do. Can't be sure until the results are posted. I'm sure. And how was your day? You know, the usual. I described how Aussie had tried to play up to me just to make Brendan jealous, the way she touched me and the way Brendan had glared, though his eyes didn't turn as dark as Danny's could. You really like pushing my buttons, don't you? Maybe. How about I push yours instead? I am more than open to the idea. Sometimes it was fun to play with fire.
Oh, you knew what you were doing, Flynn. Aussie used you to make Brendan jealous. Ah, what a different world we're in.
So that was it. My exams were concluded. The final grades wouldn't be recorded for some time. I suspected the instructors wanted to sneak in a little vacation before going over the papers, but I wasn't worried. I thought I'd done pretty well. The June sunlight warmed my hair. It wasn't too hot. This was still England after all, but it was nice. The flowers were in bloom, the water's ripples licked at the banks, fluffy clouds sailed by overhead. I had learned to love it here. But soon I would have to leave it all behind.
Very soon.
The university exam period had concluded. Everyone's tests were done and the semester was officially over. To celebrate, we were having a tiny party at the hostel. Ashley had baked a cake, and James had even deigned to provide some ice cream. If he'd really wanted to be generous, he could have sprung for us all to party at the Crafty Crown since he was a friend of the owner, but I knew better than to expect that much. The tension from my betrayal had slowly faded away. The real culprit behind the thefts had never been caught or punished, but it felt like most people had stopped holding it against me. Looking around the room, I realized I had less than 3 weeks left in England. It was almost time for me to go home. All the people that I had met here, all the adventures we had, dinners with Ashley, fights with Angelo, weird conversations with Mark, Peggy's effervescent energy, Danny's guidance, Ji-hyo's artwork, even Aussie and Brendan, even James. Soon I wouldn't be able to see them again. I had seen the same people every day for weeks, and that would no longer be the case. It was a strange feeling, but I was starting to realize that I wasn't all that sad, at least not yet. Maybe it was because I was already detaching myself from them to some extent. I had come here to broaden my horizons and learn how to live in different ways, to help find out what I wanted to be. Maybe part of me was ready for the next step, the next adventure, the next stage in my life. Well, there were a couple of weeks left. Whatever I wanted to get done, I'd better make the best of it.
2 weeks fly by. So whatever he did, we'll never know. Literally, flying right by.
You ready to go? Danny showed up at my door looking nice as usual in his well-fitting clothes. He always dressed well. The only exceptions were when he was working out or not wearing clothes. Yup. I locked my door and followed Danny out of the hostel, practically skipping with excitement. So what's the surprise? Surely you can tell me now that we're on the date. Be patient, why don't you? We're nearly there. We are? Danny gestured to a little shop on the corner just ahead of us. Cafe. Not just a cafe, the cafe. The cafe where I first unveiled who I was to you. The cafe where you started to get to know the real me. Huh. Started is right, man of 1,000 secrets. He waved an impatient hand. Anyway, we're celebrating the start of our relationship here. It's symbolic. I need to talk to you about something. Don't get all nervous. He must have noticed me tense up. I nodded and took some deep breaths. It's nothing bad, but I thought, well, let's go in. After you. He opened the door for me with a grand flourish, and I entered face warm. People were staring throughout the cafe, many women giving me approving nods.
Thanks, ladies.
I'll get our drinks. You want to grab the table? Sure. In accordance with Danny's symbolic tendencies, I politely asked a couple to move from the table we sat in when we first came to the cafe. It wasn't hard to remember the table, the one right next to the entryway and right up against a window. The couple acquiesced, though I couldn't tell whether it was because I asked nicely or because they could sense something was up. Finally, Danny came around with the drinks, handing me a minty mocha. Then yours is, let me guess, that odd black tea thingy? Odd black tea. I like it. They should use that officially in the menus. I'll pitch it to them next time. He winked at me and I flushed again. Not fair. Completely fair. He grinned, taking a sip from his cup. Then he set his hands together on the table and looked at me. Well then, I suppose I should get this started. I nodded hesitantly. Right. He swallowed and tugged at the collar of his shirt. I tried to hold back my surprise. Danny was never nervous. Literally, never nervous. Even when he told me he was an ex-convict, he hadn't seemed this nervous. What was going on? Well, you see, I have come to ask you to make a choice. He swallowed again, then interlaced his fingers together. I have come to care about you a great deal. Yes, one might even be able to say that I have come to love you, Flynn. I opened my mouth, but he gave me a short shake of the head. He wasn't finished. In light of this, and in light of my disposition, I feel it is necessary to make this choice now, or at least in the coming few days before things get out of hand. You know what kind of man I am. You know my tendencies towards jealousy and possession. I am not proud of them, but you have been willing to accept me as I am. I never want to control your behavior, and I never want to manipulate you or make you feel as though you can't or shouldn't do something. I believe I've already made this clear to you. In order to do this effectively, I have been holding back somewhat. I have been not entirely thinking of you as mine, I suppose you could say. Of course, semantics and all that. You will never, and can never truly be mine, as you are your own person. But what I am asking you to choose is this. Either you leave me now, and we can maintain a relationship as friends, or as nothing, if that suits you better. Or you accept that you are mine, now and forevermore, and I will follow you and be by your side forever, for better or for worse. That sounded suspiciously like a marriage proposal. So, Flynn. He looked at me, and for the first time in my history of knowing him, I saw fear in his eyes. What do you choose?
That's too much. No, we're gonna do this. I'm thinking about doing this for his neutral end on this side, just because we didn't last time. I'm actually gonna save here. As much as I don't want to do that to Danny, I'm kind of morbidly curious as well. Return. There we go. But lucky for you, Danny, we're on your good ending, so yes.
I want to marry you. It sounds a bit like you're proposing to me. Yes, well. He grinned and slipped something out of his pocket. That would be because I am. He slid out of his chair and down onto one knee in front of me. The people around us gasped, a few women cooed, and silence permeated the cafe. Flynn, I love you. Will you marry me and stay by my side forever? I didn't even need to think about it. Of course I will, Danny. I love you too. He beamed. He slipped the ring out of the box and onto my finger, and I pulled him into a hug. The people in the cafe exploded into applause and cheers. The man behind the register pounded his fist on the counter.
Free drink for everyone! Cheers to the happy couple!
And the applause began anew. I didn't know how we were going to manage this. I had a ticket to leave the country in only a week. But I looked into Danny's eyes, and he into mine, and I knew that I would be happy with him by my side. Forever.
Woohoo! We're getting married!
The next day, the enormity of the situation began to sink in. Were Danny and I really engaged? What was I going to tell my friends? My family? They knew I was dating Danny, of course, but they didn't know everything about him. Not even I knew everything about him. How soon could we do it? Where would we live? How would we manage? I didn't have any answers, not yet. Trying to explain this over the phone would be far too stressful, especially when I would be home next week anyway. Right now, I just wanted to spend as much time with Danny as I could. We had more celebrating to do.
Winku, winku.
It was my final weekend at the one hostel. I ran into James in the lobby, shuffling some papers behind the register. Flynn, so, you were leaving on Monday. That's right. He handed the papers to me. It's the long-term leaving checklist. What you have to clean and so on. Fill these out, sign it when you're done, leave them at the desk when you go. That way I don't have to get up early to see you out. God forbid he have to do any work. If you forget, or there's any problems, I'll bill you for it. Yeah, I'm not sure I'm comfortable just leaving this at the desk. Someone might steal it. I glared at him, trying to remind him that I was still mad about that, but he didn't seem to care. Leave it with Danny, then. Or Oscar at the Crafty Crown. Fine. Yeah, so. He scratched his armpit, staring at me intently. Would you say you have been satisfied with your stay? Overall, yes. Would you recommend this trip to your friends? Sure. What did you like about it? What is the point of all of this? Answer the question. I made a lot of friends. I got to know a lot of different people and made new friends. That was a big deal for me. Why are you asking me this? James withdrew a tape recorder from behind his back and smiled. Thank you for that. It'll come in handy. What? Have a safe trip home. I'll miss having you around. He waved a hand carelessly at me, then left the hostel and headed off down the sidewalk. What a knob. Some people never change. Wait, did I just think knob? I had been in England too long.
What a knob.
What stinks in here? Oh, well, it'll be gone soon enough. Brendan tracked me down in the kitchen during lunch. I glared at him. What do you want? Doing a victory lap? Yes, actually. I wanted to celebrate a successful operation. Some people say crime doesn't pay, but it looks like I proved otherwise again. Does it keep you up at night, knowing everybody thinks you're the culprit? Sure, they've tolerated you, but is anybody really still your friend? Certainly more than they are yours. Whatever you say. Anyways, I want to wish you a good trip home. I'm not going to follow you. Personally, I hope I never see you again. Adios, amigo. Ugh. Before I could sink too deeply into disgust or frustration, though, James entered the room carrying a tape recorder. Huh. Well, what do you know? He scowled and took off after Brendan. So, was that jerk finally going to get his comeuppance? It wasn't exactly proof, even if James did have what he said on tape, it wasn't a real confession. Still, what goes around comes around. Brendan would get what he deserved sooner or later.
Yeah, we never had Brendan show up drunk in our bedroom. So we could forgive him or whatnot. Or not forgive him, but listen to him or escort him to his bed. I wonder if there is a scene like that in this.
It was the night before I left. We were gathered in the kitchen, yet again eating one of Ashley's dishes. For me, it was probably for the last time. Nobody said anything about it, but it was clear everybody was around for a reason. I was leaving, and it was a solemn, subtle celebration for me. Or funeral, whichever. There might have been a louder party if the rest of the hostel had known about Danny and me, but we were keeping that story to ourselves. Only Brendan was missing, and no one knew why. People generally assumed he just didn't like me enough to show up. I wasn't going to waste my time thinking about him anymore. That part of my life was over and done with. We finished our meal. I helped Ashley clean up for the last time. If I didn't have to go back to a room that had been scrubbed clean, with all of my clothes packed away in a suitcase, I could have assumed it was just another day at the hostel. I said goodnight to everybody and climbed the staircase to my room. That was it. Good night, England. See you in the morning.
There we go.
It was earlier in the morning than I preferred to be awake, but I had to get going in order to reach Heathrow on time. I stepped out into the hallway, my suitcase in tow. As I did, several doors opened and people popped their heads out, evidently to say goodbye. It was as if they hit a tripwire somewhere and I had just rung an alarm. Peggy approached me, rubbing her eyes. I couldn't tell whether they were red because of lack of sleep or because she had been crying.
Flynn, thank you so much for coming to the hostel. I know you didn't expect to get a bunch of people like us as friends, but I'm glad you did. It was ace getting to know you, and I'll miss you. You're like a big brother to me. I won't ever forget you.
Never give up on trying to change the world, Peggy. We need people like you. She grinned and punched the air.
I won't!
I passed Angelo's room, which was still dark. Is Angelo still asleep? Should I wake him up or something?
No, he left. In the middle of the night, I think. Guess he doesn't like goodbyes.
Oh. It was just like him to leave without considering anyone else's feelings. But then maybe I was the one not considering his. Mark came bouncing down the hall towards me, chipper as ever, even this early in the morning.
Hello, Flynn. You're heading out then?
He grabbed my shoulders and spread his arms out to the sky.
Just think of the world that's waiting for you. Think of the endless possibilities. After all, someday everything will end and you will be forgotten. Isn't that wonderful? Go out and get your dreams. Take all the risks you can. Live a full life. Even if you make a bunch of mistakes, eventually in the long run nobody will be around to care. I can't imagine a more wonderful freedom than this.
Thanks, Mark. I'll miss your inspiring speeches.
I'm sure you will. That's why I prepared several on this mixtape for you.
He handed me an old-fashioned cassette tape, of all things. I didn't know they even made these anymore, but I took it with a smile. Thanks.
Anytime, anytime. If you need any help, just hit me up. I'm never too far away.
He waved and headed back to his room. I wasn't sure I would ever meet a stranger man than that one.
Oh, you're leaving.
Ashley's eyes filled with tears and I found myself in a panic. Don't cry, I'm not...
You're not?
Well, I am leaving, but don't cry. We'll always have the internet, and our memories?
I won't be able to cook for you anymore. You were always my favorite person to cook for because you always said thank you and you helped me with the dishes. You're such a nice person, Flynn. I am truly sad to see you go. I wish you the best in your future endeavors. Wait, no, that's what you say to someone who's just been fired. I'm sorry. I don't know what to say. I just want you to be happy.
I wish you the same. No matter what happens, don't lose your kind heart, Ashley. The world needs more people like you. She smiled, wiping her watery eyes.
Thank you. I'll remember that.
Hey. Jiho stood in front of me, hands behind her back. I hope you have a safe trip home. I hope everything goes well for you from now on. I smiled. Thanks, Jiho. I hope everything goes well for you too. You're a great artist, so I hope you'll be able to be successful. Jiho stared at the floor and nodded. You know, maybe I don't like art as much as I thought. I stared at her. You're kidding. That's almost all you're ever doing. What are you talking about?
It's nothing. Just more drama from the creative types. You know how we can be, always worried about the muse and whatnot.
She bopped herself on the head with a bright smile. I didn't think she actually felt any better, but I also didn't think there was much I could do about it now. I wish I understood her.
I'm actually glad going back through all of this because I'm picking up on stuff having done their roots as Malia. Like, I never picked up on this with Jihyo before, but because we weren't with her and encouraging her, she's like, I think I'm just gonna go back into business when I get back to Korea.
Well, I wish you the best. I truly think you can succeed. You have talent, passion, and discipline. That's everything you need. Don't give up, okay? She nodded, her hands behind her back once again.
I won't.
I was tempted to check and see whether her fingers were crossed, but she went into her room before I could say anything else. I took one last look around the front entrance of the hostel. Last month, I was pulled into the dining room and told that I might not be able to live there anymore. At that time, I was horrified. I realized the hostel had become more of a home to me than I ever guessed it would. But now that I was leaving it, it felt different. It was only a temporary place for everyone after all. Memories of my bedroom in New York came flooding back to me, and the hostel was left looking shabby and stained in comparison. I had spent months here, studying, working, making friends, avoiding enemies, and now it was time to leave.
I just realized Aussie never said goodbye to us. So petty.
In the full summer sun, the yard was a lot brighter than it had been when I first arrived, but it was still a mess. James hadn't made anyone tend it recently. I made the short walk from the door to the taxi with my heart in my stomach and tears pricking my eyes. I would miss it here. I really would. Danny helped get my suitcase into the trunk of the waiting taxi. You know, you were the first person I met when I got here. You helped me then, and you're helping me now. It seems fitting. Like bookends. Except that this isn't the end. He pulled me in for a fierce, thorough kiss, and I swore I could hear a girl cheering in the background.
Probably Peggy.
Ring me as soon as you get home. I need to know that you're safe. I promise. I wanted to kiss him again, but if I didn't get into the taxi now, I might never leave. And that probably wasn't the best way to take the next step in our relationship. And so I opened the car door and climbed inside. As I did, I saw several heads poke out of the main hostel door. My friend smiled and waved goodbye to me as I left. The taxi driver started the car up, and off we went down the street. That was it. Goodbye, hostel. Goodbye, England. As the car drove further, my sadness melted away, replaced with a sense of relief. I was going home. The adventure was over.
Back to our friends and junk.
I stepped out of the arrivals area, searching the faces, eagerly scanning the outpouring of people.
Flynn!
I jumped. There they were, Nene and Jinsu, for the first time in a long while. Nene ran to me and jumped into my arms. I laughed as I hugged her, and Jinsu watched on like a proud father.
I missed you so much!
It's great to be back. Man, I have so much to tell you guys. Nene pulled away from me, mouth hanging open.
Talk again!
What? What do you mean?
Oh my gosh, say something again!
What are you going on about? Do I sound weird?
You picked up a little bit of an English accent. How did that happen?
What? No, you're a loony. I was only there for a few months. I still sound plenty American.
No, there's something different in your voice. I can tell.
I glanced at Jinsu, who shrugged. She's got a point if you ask me. So tell us about your trip. What did you do? What did you learn? And so I tried to sum up everything I could. Everything I had learned, everything I saw, all the friends I'd made and left behind.
Our little boy's all grown up.
Nene's eyes filled with tears and I sighed. Jinsu clapped me on the shoulder. So, is there a special someone that you're going to see again? I couldn't help grinning like an idiot. No, like a big, giddy, lovesick fool.
Oh my god, you've got a secret! You always look like that when you've got a secret. What is it? Is your boyfriend on the flight? Are you bringing him home?
No. Nothing like that. Yet. I'll tell you everything later. I promise.
Let me see your hand.
Nene grabbed hold of my hand and let out a high-pitched squeal.
A ring! You got a ring!
You certainly did have a time, didn't you? You could say that. We headed over to the baggage claim area, watching the luggage pour out of the opening like flies out of a frog's mouth. So here's my question. Was it worth all the trouble? Did you find what you were looking for? Was it worth all the trouble? What a hard question to answer. All of the friendships I made, the experiences I had, all of these things were my own doing. If there was anything I regretted not doing, or anything I regretted saying, those things were on me. It was within my power the entire time to create an experience that was worth the trouble, so to say that it would be an admission of failure on my part. And how would I know what it was worth anyway? I had experiences that changed me, changed how I thought of myself as a person, changed who I believed I could become. I was a different person because I had those experiences. Even if I wanted to, I couldn't go back now. And why should I? Definitely. It was definitely worth it. Jinsu grinned and pulled me into a hug. That's what I wanted to hear. I'm proud of you. I really am.
Ooh, there's your bag. I'll get it for you.
Let's head home. I'm sure you're jet lagged as all get out. Yeah, I just want to sleep. You can figure out where to go from here once you've got some shut-eye and some food in your belly.
Another chapter of your life closes. But I guess the new one's going to be just as much in your hands as this one, eh?
Too much. Too heavy for me. Just let me go to sleep.
Okay. Come on, you can sleep in the car.
Together we left the airport. I remember the night before I left New York for England all those months ago. I had stared up at the ceiling, thinking I was crazy for wanting to go abroad, wondering what the future held for me. Now I had the same feeling, but I no longer felt like the decision was out of my hands. England seemed miles and years away, as if it had been one long dream, as if I had just woken up. The same thoughts as ever churned around in my head. What now? What did I want to do with my life? But now I could fall asleep with a smile on my face. I was excited. I couldn't wait to see what the future held for me. That alone made the trip worth it.
And now, 1 year later.
We entered the doorway of our private resort cabin with long sighs and deep breaths. It smells amazing out here. I never knew the air could be so fresh. It's why I insisted on this island instead of Hawaii or the Bahamas. Everyone goes to those places, but this is more of an undiscovered secret. Danny took our suitcases into the bedroom and I went into the kitchen to search for the glasses. When I found one, I grabbed the water pitcher to fill it and a golden gleam caught my eye. It was still odd for me to see the large rock on my finger. Danny didn't give me a diamond. There were a dime a dozen, apparently, so instead he fitted my finger with a multicolored opal.
Wow, Flynn still got the opal. Nice.
The greens, reds, and blues mixed and shifted together in the light. Danny said when he gave it to me that it reminded him of us, and the multiple parts of ourselves that mixed together. At the wedding, I wasn't sure I'd ever find anyone I could share all of my colors with. I didn't think anybody out there could accept me, nor did I think they should have to go through that. But then you came along and changed everything. You changed my whole perspective. You changed me. You changed my life. And that is why I am now taking you to be my husband. I don't want to live without you, not even for a second. I smiled and ran a finger over the stone, then two arms wrapped around me from behind. You like it, I see. You put so much thought into it, how would I not? He rested his head in the nape of my neck and took a deep breath. Don't! I'm sure I don't smell too good after the plane. You smell great. You smell like you. But, my dear, we have some business to attend to before we can really start to relax. What is it? Do we have to check in somewhere else, too? Danny shook his head, a mischievous glint in his eyes. We haven't consummated the marriage. You won't be officially mine until we do so. I flushed. I guess that's right. We should make that happen. I wouldn't want to be somebody else's. His eyes flashed and I grinned. You're a wicked one, Flynn. No, I'm definitely not. That's why I'm glad we came to a private island. I won't have to share you with anyone. He bent down and swept me up into his arms. I laughed as I clung to his neck, and he walked me bridal style into the bedroom. 'Cause he's strong. Get ready, Flynn. No one will be able to hear you scream in here. Perfect. I've always been a screamer. And so the rest of our lives together began. Not with a spark, but with fire. And this fire would never go out.
Nice. Well, I am slightly disappointed that there wasn't more variation between the female MC and the male MC with that route. But there was like some differences, and I enjoyed those differences. And yeah, I thank you guys for joining me, whether you joined me for the differences or for the whole listening to my husky male voice. Regardless, thank you for joining me. I'm still gonna go and get the neutral end just so that it's done from the guy perspective. Because these two, that will be the new things. I feel like Ashley's is gonna be a lot different. I'm kind of not expecting Peggy's or Mark's or Jihyo's to be all that different. But I'm expecting a bit of variation in Ashley's, actually. And of course, Brendan and Ossie's like completely unexplored territory. Brendan not so much, but it's gonna be interesting with Brendan. And yeah, so anyway, I'll do the neutral ending for Danny. And then we'll move on from there, guys. Thank you very much for joining me. And until next time, I will see you later.